Today, we are diving into one of the most fascinating ironies in American history, the life and presidency of William McKinley. He was elected as this ultimate domestic policy wonk, a guy absolutely laser-focused on tariffs and American industry. Yet almost entirely by accident, he ended up becoming the architect of a modern global American empire. It is a stunning story about shifting priorities and global conflict, and it really sets the stage for how America positions itself in the world today. Okay, let's dive right into this. How exactly does a domestic tariff expert, someone whose whole political brand was entirely focused on local hometown prosperity, end up building an overseas empire? It just seems like a massive contradiction, right? Well, to really wrap our heads around his imperial legacy, we actually need to rewind all the way to his beginnings and look at the rapid political rise that shaped his entire worldview. Born back in 1843 in Niles, Ohio, McKinley's early life was completely defined by public service and a very grounded local perspective. He was actually just briefly attending college and teaching in a country school when the Civil War broke out. And he didn't start at the top either. He enlisted as a private in the Union Army. But his exemplary character really showed early on. He actually rose through the ranks to brevet major, even serving on the staff of Colonel Rutherford B. Hayes. After the war, he just went to work building a solid life for himself. He studied law, opened an office in Canton, Ohio, and married Ida Saxton, the daughter of a local banker. And though they tragically lost 2 daughters before they reached adulthood, McKinley remained incredibly deeply rooted in his Ohio community. It was exactly this local, community-first focus that set the stage for his entry into politics. So at age 34, McKinley begins what would become a 14-year career in the House of Representatives. Thanks to his quick intelligence and, frankly, an attractive personality, he landed a coveted spot on the Ways and Means Committee. He rapidly became the leading Republican tariff expert, even lending his name to some major 1890 legislation. After that, he went on to serve 2 full terms as the governor of Ohio. But what's really fascinating here is how his peers saw him. Colleagues like Robert M. La Follette Sr. noted that McKinley generally sided with the public against private interests. He was genuinely viewed as a man of the people, fiercely fighting for everyday domestic prosperity. Now, that popular reputation was put to the ultimate test in the 1896 election, right on the heels of a severe economic depression known as the Panic of 1893. The battle lines for this election were incredibly stark. Backed by a wealthy Cleveland businessman named Marcus Alonzo Hanna, McKinley ran this highly effective front porch campaign right from his home in Canton, pitching himself as the advance agent of prosperity. His Democratic opponent, William Jennings Bryan, well, he offered a radically different solution. Bryan advocated for the free and unlimited coinage of both silver and gold to mildly inflate the currency. Hanna capitalized on the fear of Bryan's silver views to amass these massive contributions from Eastern Republicans, which ultimately secured a really decisive victory for McKinley. So with McKinley in office and the Panic of 1893 finally fading away, he immediately defers the whole silver question and calls a special session of Congress to enact the highest tariff in history. In this newly business-friendly atmosphere, American industries and companies just boomed at a totally unprecedented pace. But, this rapid corporate growth raised a huge question for folks at the time. Was McKinley actually controlled by big business? Newspapers were regularly running caricatures of him as a little boy being led around by Nursey Hannah, essentially trying to paint the President of the United States as a puppet for giant corporate trusts. But if we look at the reality of the situation, it was quite different. McKinley very publicly condemned the trusts. He actually called them dangerous conspiracies against the public good. At his core, he was still that same domestic policy wonk, trying to balance this crazy rapid industrial growth with what was best for the everyday public. But just as he's hitting his stride on the home front, the narrative of his presidency completely shifts. And this brings us to a massive, unexpected pivot. McKinley's domestic priorities were suddenly and forcefully derailed by foreign policy during his very first term. Down in Cuba, Spain's repressive rule had sparked a huge rebellion, and Spain answered that rebellion with a brutal, heavy-handed campaign to end the hostilities. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., American businesses and individuals, many of whom had investments and big visions for Cuba, began heavily lobbying the United States government to step in and intervene. McKinley was really cautious about the whole thing, but to protect American interest, he dispatched a ship, the USS Maine, to Havana. Then, February 15th, 1898. A massive explosion completely tears through the USS Maine. 266 crew members were killed. That single number utterly and irreversibly changed the trajectory of American history. The really crucial point here is how incredibly fast things escalated from there. After the Maine exploded in February, diplomacy essentially dried up. McKinley felt he literally had no other option left, and Congress officially declared war on April 25th. And the conflict itself? It was stunningly brief. In roughly 100 days, the United States had completely defeated Spain. Almost overnight, this domestic peacemaker was suddenly a victorious wartime commander-in-chief. The fallout of all this was the Paris Peace Treaty in December 1898, and this is the moment that truly cements McKinley as the architect of a modern empire. By the terms of this treaty, the United States officially receives Guam and Puerto Rico. As for Cuba, the U.S. promised to support its independence but decided to temporarily occupy it. So the entire map of American global influence was literally redrawn overnight. But the expansion absolutely did not stop there. And it started involving some immense, highly transactional sums of money. The U.S. outright paid $20 million for the Philippine Islands. And to add to this massive Pacific expansion, earlier that exact same year, Congress had also voted to support the annexation of the Kingdom of Hawaii. McKinley threw his full weight and support behind all of these measures, officially locking in America's powerful new clout on the international stage. Now, obviously, these new acquisitions offered incredible new opportunities for international trade and economic development for the U.S. But, as we know, building an empire is never just a simple transaction on a piece of paper. This brand new American empire was met with fierce, immediate resistance. The reality was that not all of these populations were exactly grateful for American intervention. They had their own fierce, deeply rooted visions of independence. And this clash of visions was absolutely most devastating in the Philippines. Nationalist leader Emilio Aguinaldo led a major revolt, arguing that the Americans were simply acting as colonizers, just like the Spanish they had just replaced. This sparked a grueling 3-year conflict, and the toll was horrific. We're talking over 5,000 American deaths, and for the Filipinos, hundreds of thousands died as a result of the fighting, famine, and disease. It is a really stark, heavy reminder of the true human cost of imperial expansion. So, right against the backdrop of this massive overseas conflict, the election of 1900 rolls around. It's a total rematch of 1896, but the political platforms had evolved dramatically. William Jennings Bryan fiercely attacked this new American imperialism. He basically made it the entire core of his campaign. McKinley, on the other hand, quietly stood for what he famously called the full dinner pail. He kept focusing the conversation back onto the massive domestic economic success his administration had overseen. And the American people, who were largely enjoying all that industrial prosperity, gave McKinley a second term, which began incredibly auspiciously. But sadly, that second term would be cut tragically short. In September 1901, McKinley traveled up to the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. This event was supposed to be a grand, optimistic celebration of progress and prosperity across the Americas. It really was the perfect fitting stage for a president who was overseeing an unprecedented economic boom. But while he was standing in a receiving line there, happily greeting the very public he had spent his entire life serving, the unthinkable happened. McKinley was shot twice by an anarchist named Leon Czolgosz. Despite some initial hopes from his doctors that he actually might pull through, William McKinley died 8 days later, on September 14, 1901. It was a violently sudden end to a presidency that had fundamentally transformed the nation. And that leaves us with a truly profound historical legacy to consider. Was the immense human and moral cost of a global empire worth the domestic prosperity McKinley championed? It really is the ultimate irony, isn't it? The man from Canton, Ohio, who wanted absolutely nothing more than to ensure a full dinner pail for the working class, ended up redrawing the entire global map through brutal overseas conflict. So what do you think is his most defining impact?